get the whole story.
Argue are things that could have been avoided or sorted out in the moment where there was a call for help. As we went to the break, we were talking about, okay, so some of the things they complain about, the external funding issue aside, some of them on this list mention, a difficult business environment.
And they didn't know this before they got into that business environment.
This is the question I want to ask, that we already know that it will be difficult here and there. Taxes are high, cost of compliance is high. Those things now make it difficult for you to jostle. And then at the same time, we know, already it's been told to us, that the number one issue for SMEs and MSMEs on the continent is access to credit. That's the number one challenge, bottleneck for everybody, doesn't matter where you are. So how can these challenges be overcome if you want to have vibrant and viable business in the country, in anywhere?
Most of the people who have the money, most of the institutions who have the money are not business people. They don't think. They're bureaucrats.
The people who have the money, the people who own the business?
No, the people who are in charge of it, the people who are at the helm, where you can find these monies that you're talking about. They're not
the holders of capital.
Yes, they're not business people.
I think I'll keep coming back to local context. I think we have to give local entrepreneurs and local entities, the value, and I call it non-capital value. When you're looking at what you bring to a business, you don't just bring money. Otherwise, you'd have just left the money there and it would have multiplied, But you're investing in something. Now, that something has a value. Now, where are we going to... What you talk about is the lack of adequate capitalization. There are some basic things a business needs to do to take off. Yeah. Now, most don't start with even those basic things. They are starting from far below. So instead of focusing on fixing the problem that they saw in setting up the business and getting to a certain point where they see success or failure, they are focused on survival from day one, And that would not be the case if they were adequately funded. And I'm not sitting here saying that if you throw money at a problem, it disappears, because we all know that not to be true. But what I'm saying is that take, whether it's going to be a pilot, take some of these young entrepreneurial businesses, fund them adequately, set up controls and measures to monitor that funding, and let them be. Because a lot of these businesses were not executing models that the founders or the local founders were entirely taken to. Some of them were executing, had models tweaked to meet the requirements of the funders. So my plea for more local funding, and I'm glad to say that you can begin to see it coming through. We hope we can see more of it in the next decade. But is because I think we will build much more sustainable local businesses if those that are funding, one, are local and can see the nuances, but even if they're international, if they respect and give due credence to local context. Nairobi is not a microcosm of the Silicon Valley. It's Nairobi. The nuances of how the Nairobi consumer behaves and how he consumes are different, even though you're consuming the same thing, So can we give that its proper place in the whole capital discussion?
Does it tell, or does it give a foreboding atmosphere around the business environment in the country if we see this happening in 2023? We're not talking about something that happened 10 years ago. We're saying that businesses fold and businesses folded in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
This year. So for those who, and we also know that it's been touted, entrepreneurship is one of the factors of development. When you see that now individuals or groups of people then now have the might and muscle to come together and form businesses whereby they can provide, goods and services to the general population for which it will be exchanged for money, you start to grow and mushrooming development takes place, right? We know that. But if the environment is showing that it's hostile, at whatever level, external, internal with government, wherever, how does that then foster growth when you say, again, entrepreneurship and the development of business is a factor for development? And we can see that the environment does not provide that atmosphere that is necessary for that to grow. Who are these people who are going to come tomorrow after having seen 8 businesses shut down, and they're going to say, well, okay, I'm going to try this. Why not? I can survive. Who are those?
I think they're there in the sense that sometimes opportunities show themselves in the midst of chaos. Chaotic environments are sometimes when you see the real problems and you see what solutions you can provide.
And probably the place where you make the most profits if you actually understand how to navigate those
Very
waters.
true. And we're not talking about again, this is not a Kenyan problem. This closure of businesses has been happening internationally. Of course, this year we have really seen the government flex its muscle and really, I would say, hit us where it hurts, because the market is tough, but everything is going up. So that doesn't help either. But they will still be there. I'm sure there's someone somewhere still thinking up a solution and a business to open. You're seeing a lot of these businesses, not all of them that had their funding either rearranged or it dried up. Not all of them closed. Some of them are now trying to rethink their models and say, how do I change to see how I can work within the means that I have, and are doing business plans that speak to that. So there'll always be people ready to come and start businesses. And we're in a tough season, yes. But I think there still are great opportunities. And the greatest I lean to, and I hope, is Kenya is a blessed nation when it comes to the capacity and the intellect of what we have as a people. The knowledge of different sectors is quite phenomenal. Yet that knowledge and the capital are not quite talking, or are not quite talking the same language.
You know,
so can we get to a place where
they are?
They are.
So then what needs to happen for them to be speaking the same language? Because somebody's here speaking this and somebody's here speaking... What is going to be that communal moment when that happens? Something needs to catalyze that, doesn't it?
I think it's already happening, if you ask me. Yes, it is. Out of the adversity that you find the Kenyans facing, they find ways of ensuring they survive in that very hostile environment. Now, it may look like a cliche, but that in itself tells you that the mindset and the willingness to actually find solution exists. You can see it, even in the most dire of circumstances. Now, when you talk about made in Kenya, forget garments, forget things that we look at, and think of the mindset. How is it that Kenyans will easily say, oh, that's a Kenyan? What is it about a Kenyan that is clear? For instance, when we talked about some of these businesses that are funded by foreign entities and they go under, as a Kenyan, the first thing I asked, was that money given to a Kenyan? The reason why we ask that question is because we understand that if it's a Kenyan who has given that money and the business has folded, you're not really sure whether that money was actually put to the use it was intended. You're not really sure. Now, it sounds adverse and it sounds almost negative and degrading, but it is a reality that we Kenyans understand about ourselves.
I think, but it's a reality, but it's also a bit of a stereotype.
Yes, it is.
In the sense that...
Not a bit.
Yeah.
It's very much a stereotype.
Yes.
Yes.
In the sense that I think some of the brilliant stories of Kenyan entrepreneurship, one of the challenges we have as a nation is that they are not heard. You know, our entrepreneurs are very visible and vocal and, you know, boisterous, and they're in your face. And
they're consuming conspicuously for
yes,
the whole world to see.
So the aspirations are that is business.
That's not business.
But there are lots of Kenyan businesses. There are lots of Kenyans running really well-built businesses.
Yes, they are.
And that have even survived generations, you know, and are very well run and are aspiring for greater. Now, the question is, even those ones, how do we connect them, or how does local capital connect with them so that we can start to build regional and continental powerhouses.
But consider the dominant narrative is the one I presented,
Agreed.
which has a very negative tinge to it. But you're right. As we were talking earlier on and talking about the food industry, I'm reminded of Kosewe. Okay? A simple concept. Look at the very humble beginnings. And how it became a go-to eatery.
Yes.
Okay? Now, almost unbelievably so. I'm saying unbelievably so because just the numbers of people who would go there, it competed favorably with some of the best eateries that people talk about.
Agreed.
Now, that's local, as local as it gets.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. In everything.
Now, there are others.
Now, my question is, and I'm glad you brought up Kosewe, is because it's a brilliant Kenyan story, but it's also a sad one. Because Kosewe at its prime was phenomenal. Now, how do you take a Kosewe concept? Yeah. Now, what happened to Kosewe? If you look at Kosewe, ownership is the quest to grow a business and make it into a big business of what it does very well.
Yes.
Or is the quest to make some money and then go into other things?
Yeah.
Were you a food operator
From the
aspiring to
beginning.
be a landlord, for example,
Or a
or
did you want
or a
to- did you want
hotelier?
to provide
So you
good
now
food,
starve
yeah.
the goose that's laying the golden egg of capital by taking out that capital to do other things. And it saddens me because I think it was an amazing brand.
Do you think that's what ails businesses?
It is part of what?
To a large extent. Because,
is what
you're
part
doing
of- part
well,
of-
you're chugging along, you're doing the thing, right? And you start to make some, because it is profit. You start to make some profit. Rather than take that profit and enlarge that thing that has, again, laid the egg, we see that that profit is taken and you want to, of course, buy a plot, buy 2, 3, put up a set of apartment buildings. Would you say that the bane then of the downfall of many businesses could also be attributed to wanting to stretch this profit thin as opposed to focusing and making this worm very fat?
I think we have examples of both. You have given an example of Kosewe.
Yeah.
But I think Equity Bank is a phenomenal Kenyan story of capital. And in our membership, in the RETRAC membership, you have lots of examples of capital well executed over a period of time to create a phenomenal brands. I mean, look at our supermarket sector. Our supermarket sector has had its downs.
Yes.
Big brands collapsing. But look what's happening now. Naivas, Quickmart, all local brands, well built, international standards. On the spectacle front, look at Optica. You're seeing Optica everywhere. On the shoes front, you see people like City Walk. On the healthy foods, you have brands like Healthy You. On the beauty front, you have brands like Linton's. These are all local brands that have focused. They're not a supermarket aspiring to become a landlord,
Right.
or to build a block of flats.
They're staying within the space.
They're staying in the space. And look at Equity Bank now. You talk about a regional banking powerhouse with continental ambitions. That's that, and a great example of the local and international capital given to local intellect with strong local context. And look what they've built.
Actually, Equity is a very good example.
Yeah.
Because it's so successful that it actually attracted this so-called external funding. People want to partner with you because they can see what you're doing works.
With local teams.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
With very strong, well-built local teams.
Yes.
And now you go and you're now talking about, you have other examples in the financial sector. But what I'm saying is that can we appreciate that local intellect and context has value and
Indeed.
begin to unlock it?
So then, and that's the thing, that you look at the value, but you can't just keep looking at it because, all right, it's nice and shiny, but then you have to be able to start taking it and using it. And are we saying now that even as we've seen businesses folding in the last year, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's doomsday and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but that there's something that can be done moving forward? And what should that be?
For me, I'd speak to creating multiple options for funding, whether they are local, it would be great to see local holders of capital jump into the fray so that entrepreneurs have multiple options of where they can get their capital. And when that happens, having the ability to say that, yes, there's this idea, but this idea has respecting the element of local context that is required and intellect that is required to bring that to life. There's so much we can do. First of all, the first time I came on this show, the first time I was on this show, we were discussing food.
Yes.
If we had to have an honest conversation about the situation of our food production as a nation, the average Kenyan will be very worried. There's a huge entrepreneurial opportunity there. You have these great research brains in vet services, for example. Their research is they would not get the chance with the right kind of capital to execute what they know works. So can we bridge that gap? Bridge that gap between the intellect and the capital so that we can truly unlock value that the country and the nation has.
You know, when we talk about local capital seeking to be adventurous, there are two impediments in my mind. One is just government and its policies, and then something we refer to as crony capitalism, because it kills competition. One doesn't. Well, you find people walking around thinking they're businessmen and they're not, because there is no value they're creating. They just know ways and means of ensuring that they're in a place where money can come to them, or they can grab at it, or they can ensure that it gets to them. Now, why I'm saying this kills what we're talking about is it's huge amounts of money that find their way to individuals, and yet this same amount of money, if it were in a business,
the right pockets,
precisely. These very things that you hear.
I think you've touched on a cancer. That's a cancer. We have that, and let me explain it to you from a retail context.
Yes.
So there was a time I was working for a local restaurant chain, and we were seeking for space. Now, restaurant metrics say that if we get a location in this place, it will sell X amount, and as a result, you work backwards and you can say, if we are able to sell this much per month, then our expenses correspondingly should be this, this, and this. Now, you then go to a landlord, and the landlord is quoting $1-based rent. He's saying he wants $3 per square foot. And you're like, I won't make money on $3 per square foot because we were running our business based on restaurant metrics. But what is the landlord's response? He's saying people are signing up. This same space that you're complaining about, and saying that it doesn't make commercial sense to take it up, even though you want to be in this location, there are people taking it up. Now, those people who are taking it up are the ones you speak about. They are not in it. They are either wives, husbands, mistresses, or children. And they are given money, and if the business can't pay for the rent, more money will be availed and the rent will be paid. So that muddies the waters, because then you have unrealistic rents. Landlords feel that, I can get this rent. I am getting this rent. But who is he getting that rent from?
Let's look at a point to continue the conversation on into the future. And the thing is that the environment could look hostile, because in many cases it is. But are we saying that there is a way in which, those who will go into business, those who will have startups, those who will look towards communities to say we can grow this thing, actually still have an opportunity to strike fire?
Indeed, they do. And I'm here. I'm going nowhere. So I'm in this space. We'll continue to be in this space, learn from the lessons and the failures. But there are many of us in the market. And we'll continue to beat this drum of having this conversation about capital from a different perspective. It's no different from the conversation that the president is having in an international context, where he's saying the risk premium you place on Africa is unrealistic.
Yeah.
So we are having the same conversation in the local context, and we'll continue to have it, and we hope for success.
Indeed. Leonard Mudachi is the chairman of the Kenya Traders Association, Retail Traders Association of Kenya, and he's been our guest this hour. There's light, and this light we can see. It's a good thing. Thank you so much for being our guest this hour.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, more conversations to be had in the future.
Thank you very much.
Folks, it's always great to have you on Kenya's Biggest Conversation every morning. Thanks for hanging out and joining this conversation with us since 6 a.m. We'll be here back tomorrow morning at 6 to do it again. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Keep it Spice FM. It's 10 a.m.
KTN News.